Hello to my online learners and welcome to Digestion, Chapter 21. So when we look at digestion, we're going to look at the two different types of digestion. So there is chemical digestion where you're taking one substance and converting it into a smaller and different substance. And mechanical digestion where you basically just have a big thing and make it into a small thing, such as grinding things up with your teeth. Then we're going to look at the unique muscular layers in the digestive tract, briefly looking at the nervous system there too. Then we're going to break down all the parts, all the way from the mouth, all the way to the anus, and looking at what happens in each. So again, function, name that organ, what does it do? So look at structure and function. What is a certain specific structure in that organ that makes it unique for whatever the function is? Then that is what we call the digestive system or the alimentary canal. Then there are organs outside the digestive system that the food doesn't go through, but they're very important to help the digestive process. So we're going to look at the accessory organs, mainly the liver and the pancreas, and the gallbladder, which stores it. Then a little bit about how the food gets in, how it gets broken down. So we're looking at getting the food in, breaking the food down into its parts, getting it into the bloodstream, which is absorption, and then pooping out the stuff that's left over. We're going to touch briefly on chapter 22, but mainly just to look at the hormones. There's 5 hormones that are related to hunger and satiety. Anyway, it means feeling full is what it means. I can't pronounce it today. Satiety. I gotta look that one up. Or maybe I'm just having one of those days. I'll get back to you on that. Okay, so let's go to the PowerPoint and look at it. First off, what is the parts? So let me expand this a bit so you can see the titles. All the organs. And again, I want you to name them and what do they do. So we're looking at the mouth. The food starts in the mouth. You have teeth for ripping and chewing, and we'll go through each one of these in more detail. Make sure you can label every one of these organs. It's pretty low level. You should know how to do it now. There are 3 sets of salivary glands. You don't need to know the specific name for them. You just need to know there's 3 sets of salivary glands. Mouth. Pharynx. We talked about the pharynx as the throat, and we used to compare the pharynx with the larynx. And the larynx was the voice box, which is where the air went, and the epiglottis closed it off. So here's the epiglottis here. It closes off the larynx. Remember, the larynx is the voice box. So this way food will go down the esophagus. Once the food goes into the esophagus, it goes into the stomach. Then after the stomach, the food goes into the small intestine, out the large intestine, and through the rectum. Now, when we get to the small intestine, we'll talk about the 3 different parts of the small intestine. When we talk about the large intestine, it's also called the colon. And basically, it's going up, so it's ascending. It's going across, which is transcending. And it's going down, which is going descending. Then there's this S-shaped one. So sometimes that's called the sigmoidal colon. And then there's this straight part here, which is straight, just means rectum. So this is the rectum. And then where it exits out of the body is called the anus. And that has a sphincter. A sphincter muscle. Love the word sphincter. Okay, let's look at the opening paragraph because it usually has information in, but it's kind of hidden because we don't think it's important. The digestive system performs a vital task of transforming food into chemicals that can be absorbed and used for energy. It breaks down food into its simplest components, after which it absorbs the components so they can be distributed through the body. Converting food into fuel requires a dozen organs, a vast array of enzymes, and thousands of chemical reactions. Another word for the digestive tract is also called the alimentary canal. I have no idea why it's called the alimentary canal, but it sounds very British. Think of the digestive tube as the digestive tract as a tube that extends from your mouth to your anus, but it has several distinct sections, and then there are accessory organs that help it in the aiding of its digestion. Okay? Alimentary canal. Good word. The accessory organs we're going to look at are teeth, tongue, salivary gland, liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. Now, sometimes it's called the GI tract for gastrointestinal. Gastro being a stomach word, intestinal meaning intestine. When we're looking at digestion, digestion is the breaking down of food, both physically and chemically. Mechanical digestion are two distinct phases in the process of digestion. You have mechanical digestion, which is in the first phase, and that is breaking the same food into smaller pieces of food. So you're chewing it, you're contracting your stomach, and you're churning it, but it's still the same. So if you think of, let's think of a steak, because I love steak. It's a good piece of meat or a lot of protein. As you bite into it and as you chew it, you take that big bite of steak, which is a big piece of protein, and you just break it down into smaller pieces of protein. You haven't done any digestions of taking the proteins down to its component, which is amino acid. It's not till the chemical digestion comes along. Now, one of the reasons why you want to make the big pieces into smaller pieces is so that you have greater surface area for the enzymes and the chemicals to react. So because they can react on more surface area, they now can break down the larger molecules into simpler molecules. So if we remember back to our chemistry unit, proteins are made of peptides, which then break down to amino acids. Carbohydrates break down to simple sugars. Fats break down into glycerides and fatty acids. So that's what we mean when we're breaking things down. You're actually changing the chemical component to a smaller component. Then these smaller components are small enough that they can pass through the epithelial lining in the digestive tract, and they can go into the bloodstream and then can be absorbed and distributed through the body. Food that isn't digested becomes waste or feces. Now, think of your digestive system as a tube inside a big tube. So if it doesn't get digested, it doesn't become part of your body. So your poop was never really part of your body. It's just waste products. Compared to your pee, where your pee was in your blood at one time. So it was part of your body. Let's think about poop and pee. Okay, so something different to think about when you poop. And we'll talk a little bit more about poop and healthy poop and what your poop should look like. I could go on and on about poop. Okay, there are layers to the digestive tract. Again, we talk about organs have layers of tissues, and tissues are working together. So what we're going to look at, 4 layers. The first one is called the mucosa. The mucosa is the innermost layer, and it itself has 3 layers, but don't worry too much about it, other than you've got the epithelial liner in between. Then you have connective tissue, and then a very thin layer of smooth muscle. The mucosa is where you're secreting your mucus and your digestive enzymes, and you're absorbing your nutrients. Also, there's lymphoid tissue there. So that is the mucosa. And we'll talk more about what's going on with the glands when we talk about the different organs. And then below the mucosa, or the submucosa, that is your connective layer, and that's where you have your glands, your blood vessels, your nerves, your lymph vessels. That's where you got all the vessels. Submucosa. Okay? Then you have muscularis, which just is the Latin word for muscle. And you have 2 layers in most of the intestine, or in most of the digestive organs. The stomach has 3 layers. Okay, so you have 2 layers. The inner layer is circular and the outer layer is longitudinal. So this way you can squeeze this way and you can squeeze this way, which is helpful at moving your food along the digestive tract by a really cool process we call peristalsis that we'll look at later. Then you have the outside, which is mainly connective tissue. It's the covering, and it is called the serosa. So you got mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. Okay. Now there is a really good nervous supply inside the intestines, and sometimes they call it the second brain, how your gut's the second brain. And I'm sure I went on and on and on about gut biome and how the bacteria is important to it, because the microorganisms inside your digestive tract will produce chemicals which are detected by this nervous system, which then can affect your brain and the rest of the body. Anyway, enteric nervous system. And it can, just so you know, it consists of 2 plexus, the myoenteric and the submucosa. The myoenteric is between the circular layers, and that's what controls the coordinated muscle contraction to move the food down. And then you have the submucosa, which is the ones that will stimulate the release of the glands and hormones. Okay, good. 4 layers. Know them, know their order, know what they do. When we look at the guts, unlike a good horror video when the stomach slashes, the guts spring out like sausages, your intestines and all your internal organs are held together with membranes or mesenteries. Because they're vigorously contracting, they need to be free to be moved, but at the same time they need to be anchored so they don't twist and kink and get blocked. Also, they need to have a really good blood supply, so in order to take the nutrients away. So what you have is a connective tissue or a membrane called your peritoneal. Your peritoneal has layers called mesenteries, and the mesenteries will suspend the digestive organs inside the abdominal cavity, but yet still loosely anchor them to the wall. The mesentery contains blood vessels, nerve, lymph vessels, and lymph nodes that are very important to the digestive system. Okay? There's the greater omentum and the lesser omentum, and it covers the stomach like an apron. So the greater omentum is also where your fat will be, especially if you have stomach fat or like a beer belly. This is because the fat is inside the mesentery and it is building up, or the greater omentum, not momentum, omentum. Okay? A little fat is needed there to help prevent friction, but too much will interfere with the organs. So notice here how there's a cross section, and sorry, that's not a cross section, that's a sagittal section. And you see all the different cuts, but you see the connective tissue holding it together. Okay. Now, let's briefly go through all the organs. I don't want to use that because it's got too much information. 1 minute. When we look at the enteric nervous system, nope, there we go. And I want to move this sideways. There we go. Okay. When we're looking at the stomach, mouth, I want you to realize you have very distinctive shaped teeth. You've got the ones in front called incisors, used for cutting. Then you have the canines, used for ripping. And then at the back, you have these flatter ones used for chewing. I don't need you to know every single tooth and the type. I just want you to realize your teeth are different, so have different functions. And animals or organisms that eat different food have different teeth. So something like a beaver that does a lot of nipping or chewing, a beaver or a rabbit has large front teeth. If you're a ripper like a cat, you have large canine teeth. Canine, well, that comes from dog actually. And then the back teeth are for grinding. One thing I want you to be aware of, just so you know what it is, the lingual frenulum. That's basically under the tongue. There's a connective layer that has it, and quite often when you're getting medication, you'll put it under the tongue because there's a very good blood supply in there, and so it gets into the blood supply faster. If you were to swallow this medication, it takes longer because it has to be digested. It has to pass the acidity of the stomach. It has to be absorbed from the blood. It has to pass that first pass through the liver. So it's a lot longer. The lingual frenulum, just a cool word. I'm never going to quiz you on it, but it's kind of cool. You might hear it later. You may not notice either, but on the front of your mouth, it's harder, and on the back of your mouth, it's softer. That's because you've got your skull boned on the front of your mouth, and the back is just softer because it's just more tissue. Then you have the little hangy stuff at the bottom called the uvula. There's discussion that the uvula may prevent food from going up your nose until you laugh hard and then milk comes out of it. Okay. Realize also you've got a lot of ducts down there. Your salivary glands come out. As I said before, I won't quiz you on your salivary glands on the 3 different categories. Just make sure you know that you have salivary glands. Okay. The mouth. The reason you have the mouth is the teeth. The teeth are the accessory organs. First ones to help with mechanical digestion because they're breaking down big pieces to small pieces. Then when your saliva comes out, your saliva has its own different, the saliva comes out of ducts, and the saliva has its own function. In saliva, you've got water and mucus to moisten your food and lubricate it and help it to be easily swallowed. Also, that moistening helps your taste buds. But there is the first enzyme of digestion called salivary amylase. Salivary amylase. And amylase will start the digestion of carbohydrate. Salivary amylase starts the digestion of carbohydrates, breaking it down into sugars. Okay? As I said, you have lots of teeth, and you've got baby teeth and older teeth and years of eruption. Your baby teeth are called deciduous teeth. Good. When it comes to the tooth, I want you to realize the tooth is a hard structure, but it does have nerves and blood vessels inside of it called the pulp, in the pulp cavity, and there is the root that goes into it, and it goes and is anchored into the jaw. Okay? So your teeth are alive inside. The outside is hard, and enamel is one of the hardest substances in your body. Oh, there we go. What enzyme acts in the mouth to begin the breakdown of starch? Just told you that. Oh, I said carbohydrates. Realize that starch is a carbohydrate. So the answer there is amylase. Good. Now, as you swallow the food, which is called a bolus now. So a bolus is just the fancy word for lump of food. So the bolus of food will go down, your tongue pushes up, and in the process of that, this epiglottis, which is actually part of the larynx, your epiglottis then covers over the entrance to your glottis, hence the word epiglottis, and then your food will go past it and down the esophagus. Notice also here that your uvula was pushed back up to prevent things from going in your nose. So as food is broken down, it's moistened, it's moved to the back of the throat, the soft palate lifts, and food moves down to the esophagus. And swallowing is very cool. Here's a video where the person is given a barium liquid, and barium will x-ray. It's a thick metal. So as you swallow it, you can see here, you can see the esophagus and watch the food, watch what happens to the mouth and what happens as the fluid goes down the esophagus.
Okay, I just want you to look straight ahead at the wall and say candy, candy, candy. Great. I'm going to give you the cup. This is a barium liquid. I just want you to take one sip and swallow. Great. Just take a couple sips in a row like you're thirsty. Okay.
Now, unfortunately, this one shows that the esophagus or the epiglottis is not covering it clearly, so there's swallowing issues, and that's of course why they're taking this to find swallowing issues. Okay, now there's a second video where he's again swallowing barium, but we're looking at the distal esophagus and into the stomach.
And we'll look at the distal esophagus. We'll take a spot film and we'll watch it go through and into the stomach. And I'm going to magnify this and get another view of the distal esophagus. One more swallow, please. I like to watch it passing through the esophagogastric junction and on into the stomach to make sure it flows through freely. And the last step I want to take here is to film the entire esophagus. Please go ahead and take one more swallow. And watch the peristaltic wave carry the barium through the esophagus into the stomach.
Okay, so there is contractions, and we talked about that muscle layer, the circular layer and the longitudinal layer. And as they're going, as the bolus of food is going down the esophagus, there are these muscle contractions to push it down the esophagus. Okay, this video is cool and kind of gross at the same time. This is peristalsis, and it shows the intestine, the food moving through the intestine. Plus you can see the beautiful blood supply and the fat around it. So watch the contraction of the muscle layers. And this is intestine, but it's peristalsis is a muscle contraction that moves the food through the whole gut. And there you can see it squeezing through. And the food will pass along. And you can see the squeezing, and then you can see the shortening. So there's two different muscle layers. Very cool. So just to summarize, when we talk about the esophagus starts at the top of the mouth. The epiglottis covers over the glottis, which is the wind tube to the trachea. And then that allows the food to go down the esophagus, which is moved by the muscular process called peristalsis. Now, it will go through the diaphragm, that large muscle at the bottom of the rib cage that we talked about when we talked about respiration. And then in order to get into the stomach, there is a sphincter, the lower esophageal sphincter. Sometimes, and when you have heartburn, what happens is there could be leakage in the sphincter. So the acidic combination in the stomach will actually go backwards and burn this delicate esophagus. Okay, I'm going to stop it right now because when we go into the stomach, a lot goes on in the stomach. So I don't want this to go too much longer. So have a snack, think about your epiglottis covering, take a drink, take a break if you need to, and see you for part 2 with the stomach, intestines, and further digestion.